On August 26th, an oil pipeline was blown up in Moscow.
Fuck.
Holy shit!
Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack from Ukrainian drones and missiles.
No fucking way.
Just an oil depot.
No way.
A little breeze, and there they are.
Blown up refineries and Muscovites in panic.
Something blew up hard as fuck there.
Oh my god!
Muscovites are crying.
God help us!
They're crying.
Oh no, my personal loan is absolutely blowing up. What in the world am I going to do? Oh my god, please help.
It's flying! Fuck, it's flying, damn it! Fuck!
And the drones just keep coming and coming.
Oh no, this is bad.
A series of drone attacks. The Druzhba oil pipeline is on fire, the largest in Europe, an artery that pumped millions of tons of oil.
Our bitumen plant is burning, fuck, in Gumbanero.
Oil refineries are burning in Bryansk, Volgograd, and Krasnodar Krai. The helium plant in Orenburg has been destroyed.
Shit! Look!
Just 3 drones went in there. Can you imagine?
And still, 1 hit. What? The plan is done. If it explodes now, it's gonna blow up big.
Crimea is without the Scala M radar. Tatarstan is without Shahed drone depots. Rail and air traffic are in collapse.
Oh my goodness. They have actually hit the oil refinery. They have truly hit it. Oh my goodness. That's absolutely devastating.
This is fucked up.
The plant is on fire.
Sensational news. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. Crimea has lost an important radar. Everything is burning there. Tatarstan is without its Iranian drone storage. Russia is stopping gasoline exports. Up to 15% of oil refining has been destroyed. Strikes all across Russia. The infrastructure is paralyzed, and the Rashists, Muscovites, and people from St. Petersburg are just in a state of shock.
It's just a complete shit show over there.
There was a direct hit.
I just woke up because of a sudden loud bang.
We all jumped up. I said, what's going on?
Dima says, Irina, we're being bombed.
We just opened the balcony. Look out, and right next to the house, the building is shaking.
There's an oil refinery right next to the house.
Oh my god, it's so terrifying.
Drones are turning the Druzhba oil pumping station in Bryansk into a blazing inferno. Oil refineries are burning in the Moscow region, Volgograd, Krasnodar Krai, and Slavyansk on Kuban. There are powerful explosions in Crimea, with more than 100 drones attacking the occupied peninsula.
Guys!
Guys, this is absolutely insane.
We're running.
Drone attack!
We were just sitting here on the shore.
We started moving faster, and basically it flew right by, flew right between us.
Quick, into the woods.
Oh! Shit, faster!
Again.
Second one.
Oh!
Ah.
There they are, jamming communications, mobile internet, and the most powerful Russian radar, Scala M, has been destroyed. Everything is burning.
Serena!
That's it, let's go.
We're leaving.
We arrived fucking to the sea.
Tatarstan is on fire. The Shahids kept there were destroyed. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan right now. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under strikes. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, well indeed, we are now starting to strike very intensively. So we have destroyed or severely damaged the helium plant in Orenburg. This is the only facility in Russia that produces a critical component for missiles. How much could this impact the Russian missile program and their defense industry?
Well, it will definitely reduce production, although they do have a sufficient number of laboratories where helium can be produced, including on an industrial scale. That is, they can now switch over if there is a certain critical shortage of helium specifically. But that's not the main point. This plant processed 15 billion cubic meters of gas per year. That's the key point. In other words, if the attempt to shut down the gas processing plant succeeds, and I think if not the first time, then the second, it will make it possible to expect that the Russians will at the very least have to shut down their gas wells. They simply won't have anywhere to put the gas. What does 15 billion cubic meters mean? Ukraine consumes 15 billion cubic meters for its own needs. That's as of now. We used to go up to 20 when fully operational, but right now we consume about 15 billion cubic meters. So that's the consumption of an entire country by a single plant. If you strike it, then at the very least, first of all, they don't receive a certain amount of oil, gas, so-called dollars, currency from oil production. It's an economic blow, a hit to the economy. And secondly, there's nowhere to put the gas, so they'll have to shut down the wells. And a shut-in well, it takes several years to reopen it, or else you have to flare it. That is flaring as well. If you flare for too long, the well gets destroyed. So here it's actually a triple blow, I would say, hitting the Russian economy, the military sector, and technological aspects all at once, especially regarding the transfer and involvement of certain services in the handling of this gas. So the right approach is when intelligence is at work, like I always say, when intelligence picks its own target and no one else interferes. There are these key points that, if destroyed, either halt the entire technological production cycle or deliver several blows across multiple areas, just like this helium plant. And it's all the way down there, almost in Kazakhstan. It's not far from Aktobe, well, at least by local standards. So they made it there.
Roman Grigorievich, an attack on the Druzhba oil pumping station. The largest oil pipeline hub near Bryansk is on fire. And can we say, as you always do, that this is the beginning of a systemic collapse of Russia's oil infrastructure? We're making a concerted effort to strike.
Well, we can already say that because over the past 2 weeks, there have been specifically systemic, and that's important, systemic strikes on Russian oil pumping, oil refining, and the oil and gas sector. The reason I emphasize the strike on what seemed to be a helium plant is that in reality, it was a strike on gas processing. 15 billion cubic meters, plus the most recent strikes, if we list them, for example, the Novokubishevsk, Ryazan, Afipsky, Saratov, and Ukhta oil refineries. And so there were strikes on Wednesday, there were strikes on the Novoshakhtinsk and Volgograd oil refineries. So this is definitely systematic now. Plus the strike on Unica. Remember how many years we've talked about Unecha? Well, Unecha is already 40 kilometers of the main oil pumping station, Unecha, on the Druzhba pipeline. It's called the Druzhba pipeline. Yes, that's in the Bryansk region. And the oil that's pumped is mainly from Tatarstan. The oil in the Druzhba pipeline is mostly Tatar. 300,000 barrels of oil pass through Unecha every day. That's $18 million. Every day, the Russian economy receives this amount from selling that oil. Then the oil moves on. And after Unecha, there's Mamai nearby. Mamai is also another pumping station. After that, the oil splits off into branches. That is, the pipeline goes to Usluga near St. Petersburg, where the Russian so-called shadow fleet, the tanker fleet, is loaded. Part of the pipeline goes to Belarus, branching again to the Naftan refinery, the Belarusian oil refinery, and to the Moser refinery. From Moser, the pipeline continues, branching off again, going to Poland and to Germany. All of this is oil. All of it passes through Unecha, which we struck today. And part of the pipeline now carrying refined oil as diesel. 2 pipelines, the diesel product pipeline and the Druzhba oil pipeline, go through Ukraine, which we pump to Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. But the Czechs have already refused Russian oil. They brought in Italian oil and abandoned the pipeline. So there is a move away from Russian oil. Nevertheless, a strike, meaning a strike on Unecha, would practically shut down this entire cluster. If we finish off Unecha, the first time we hit it in this round was on August 6th. Well, it was unsuccessful, as I understand it, because there was no confirmation of a fire there or anything. But although the technological process of checking the chemical analysis of the oil was initiated, today's strike, or was it yesterday's? So you could say that this strike has already inflicted some damage, but not far, about 40 kilometers away. Basically, if we go all the way, it will burn. Unecha will burn. But in order to completely stop the oil flow, you need to destroy 3 consecutive oil pumping stations. So we need to focus on Mamai, basically starting from Stalnoy Kon. If you remember, we talked about this 6 months ago. Stalnoy Kon is over there, past Bryansk. Stalnoy Kon, Desna, Unecha, and around Mamai. All of these need to be taken out. And then it will be possible to completely stop the oil flow through the Druzhba pipeline. I think that's exactly what will happen. In other words, we have the opportunity. The main thing is that our hands aren't tied by various mechanisms like they were at the beginning of the year when, by the way, we started with that same Unecha. There were good strikes on Unecha, Stalnoy Kon and Desna on Unecha in particular around February and March. But then in March, we were stopped.
Roman Grigorievich, based on the analysis, strikes on oil refineries in Volgograd, Krasnodar Krai, Slavyansk on Kuban, and simultaneous attacks across all these regions. Roman Grigorievich, what does this indicate, and to what extent can we actually attack the fuel market and military supplies in Russia? So how will these strikes specifically affect the fuel market and military supplies in Russia?
Well, I've already mentioned them. All 7 of these Russian oil refineries are million-ton plants. The Russians have about 30 of these million-ton plants, maybe a little more than 30, but not many overall. There are another 50 small ones, but those are insignificant, to be honest. They're more like moonshine stills. The real million-ton plants number about 30 or 35. And you could say we've already reached 7 of them. That's a quarter, well, a third, a quarter, a fifth, a quarter, depending on which ones are operating and their production volume. We can stop, completely shut down all Russian oil refining. And if oil refining stops, oil production will stop. Halting oil production will lead to the shutting down of these oil wells. There are thousands of them, but nevertheless, they will have nowhere to send the oil, so they'll have to shut them down. It can take years to reopen a shut-in well. Sometimes you have to wait for everything to settle because there are certain factors related to water injection. Well, that's just the technological cycle. And that's why strikes on oil refining are so important for us. Taking out refineries first will hit the Russian economy and lead to the beginning of Russia's collapse. That's the only way to defeat Russia. And naturally, the fuel that was supposed to go to the Russian army simply won't get there. It won't be produced. Strikes on plants that produce aviation kerosene are especially important. By the way, the first two plants, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky, they produce aviation kerosene, or rather, they used to produce aviation kerosene. And so the strikes were accurate, the targets were chosen correctly. The main thing now is not to stop, so that in the near future, all those people, the whole crowd who are trying to tie the hands of our armed forces in dismantling the Russian Empire, don't force us to stop striking the oil refineries by pushing for some kind of air ceasefire or something like that. If this kind of work continues for half a year, just look, 7 oil refineries in 2 weeks. By the end of the year, the Russians won't have a single one left, and we'll reach the Omsk refinery too. If we've already reached the Orenburg refinery near Kazakhstan, then believe me, we have plenty of Kazakh acquaintances who will help us at the very least get to Omsk as well. The one in Omsk is the largest. They process 21 million tons a year.
Roman Grigorievich, in August, the Russian government banned the export of petroleum products because of Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries.
That's right. Again, it's a double blow. First, what did the ban on gasoline exports lead to? To a decrease in foreign currency earnings for the Russian economy. A blow? Of course, it's a blow. It seems that only 2 plants were hit at that time, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky. And they made the decision immediately because Novokuybishevsky processes 7 million tons per year and Ryazansky processes about 15 to 17 million tons. So basically, that's like one Omsk plant, right? Like one big Russian refinery. Naturally, this shortage was immediately felt. And moreover, why is the shortage so noticeable? Because the movement of the Russian army began. An army on the move consumes a huge amount of fuel. Naturally, there isn't enough. Either the army won't have enough, or it's still harvest season, so for the harvest or for private or rather civilian use. Of course, they had to make the decision to restrict gasoline exports, and immediately gasoline prices started to rise, at least on the markets, on those big markets, on the wholesale markets. And this is already an indicator that there is a real gasoline shortage, and it's definitely going to continue in the future. Moreover, it is precisely the gasoline shortage that could lead to serious stagnation in the Russian economy through inflation. Because, well, 50 and sometimes even 70% of the price of Russian goods is actually the cost of delivery. That is the price of gasoline itself. Naturally, if gasoline starts getting more expensive, then consumer goods for Russians will also become more expensive. And Russians live by their TV and their refrigerator. And then this herd, if they open the fridge and find nothing there, just a fig with poppy seeds, well, they'll lick the poppy seeds, obviously, and just look at the fig. They'll start to moo, and not just moo, they'll start looking for horns somewhere to butt heads. This is a big problem for Putin. This is actually what he fears most. When this Russian herd that moose and bass starts looking for something to eat because their salaries just aren't enough to fill the fridge. You can't really feed yourself much with a TV. You can only feed your brain, but your stomach has nothing to do with the TV.
Roman Grigorievich, last night more than 100 drones attacked occupied Crimea. There is information that the Scala M radar in Crimea was destroyed. This means the loss of the ability to control up to 350 kilometers of airspace. And what does this now mean for the defense of occupied Crimea and the use of Russian aviation, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, there's not just one radar there. These are radars of the enemy's radio technical troops, and they are being destroyed, well, maybe 3 to 5 per week for sure. In other words, there is a systematic clearing of Crimea going on the one hand, and on the other hand, an interesting action is taking place. After we destroy the radars, the Russians take these radars and anti-aircraft missile systems, say, from some oil refinery and transfer them to Crimea. Crimea is their priority. And naturally, that means you don't have to run all over Russia destroying every air defense system. You can just focus on Crimea. They'll bring them there themselves, just like in Chornobyivka. So it's like a big Chornobyivka. How many times was it? 30 times they struck new Russian troops and equipment in Chornobyivka. So these are the strikes. So it's the same situation here in Crimea. You can focus on destroying all of the enemy's air defenses through Crimea. They'll bring them there themselves. They'll leave their rear areas exposed, but they'll try to protect Crimea, the Kerch Bridge. Today's strike on Crimea, which we're talking about now, is exactly one of those attacks. Moreover, it was a large-scale attack. It wasn't just the radar that was hit. The strikes were mainly carried out on Feodosia, on the Kerch Bridge, and in the area around the Kerch Bridge, and on the Port Kavkaz, which is next to the Kerch Bridge and is used firstly for pumping fuel into Crimea. There are pumps there. There are, of course, railroad ferries that also go to Crimea. They are loaded on the Caucasus side, where there are railway tracks, and then they are unloaded in the Kerch area. So this is a massive strike on Crimea. I think within a day, the General Staff will confirm it after decoding the active monitoring data, or at least the centers will show where the strikes were delivered, but the strike was serious. So the strike targeted Feodosia, some military facilities, and the port of Kavkaz.
Roman Grigorievich, and I watched some material related to occupied Crimea, and it reported that the Gauleiters, the occupiers, the occupation authorities made a statement that now, in the territory of occupied Crimea, there will be no mobile connection or internet at all for a very long time. This has been done so that they can fight against the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. So now they've shut down mobile service and mobile internet on the occupied peninsula. What does this indicate?
They're afraid right now at this very moment, and that's why they're doing this. From a military logic standpoint, that's exactly the case. Why? Because there is a certain protocol for protecting high-risk facilities, as they call them, like the Kerch Bridge, for example. In order to fully secure these sites, from reconnaissance to fire adjustment, they shut down all communications of any kind and at any level. They're anticipating something on Friday, time to coincide with the meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska, and they're expecting a serious strike on the Kerch Bridge. Can you imagine how Putin and Trump will be embracing each other, right? They'll probably have to put Putin on a little bench, like a piano stool, so he can reach Trump. So how are they going to be embracing each other there if at that very moment there's an attack on the Kerch Bridge or the Kerch Bridge is on fire? Naturally, the highest security protocol for the Kerch Bridge has now been activated, and they're going to shut everything down. Everyone will be marching in formation there on the parade ground for these few days until Friday. And even after Friday, most likely until Monday, because they won't be able to go on a bender starting Friday like Russians usually do. That's why I think they'll keep this maximum secrecy mode, at least in terms of security, and keep the Crimean bridge closed until Monday. We'll see. The thing is, we don't always use Russian communications either. There are other mechanisms as well.
Roman Grigorievich, the second SBU strike on the Shahid storage facility in Tatarstan. We managed to do it again in just a few days. A repeated hit on the facility, 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine. How does this currently demonstrate the capabilities of long-range drones and their strategic effect?
Well, judging by the video, by the way, I should say, these are already new advanced drones. These are drones like the Russian Geran or the Iranian Shahed or the Chinese Sunflower 200. In other words, it's a wing-type drone, a sophisticated aerial vehicle. So we've already put into serial production, or at least at their own base, the SBU guys have started producing some pretty decent drones, all things considered. The thing is, it's precisely the wing configuration that allows, if there's enough fuel and a good engine, to push this drone several thousand kilometers. It all depends on the reliability of the engine and the amount of fuel. So they've gone into this area, and it's the right direction, the right path, because fixed-wing drones are, of course, better used at short ranges. At least that's how we use the Beavers, right? Or, for example, those same fierce An-196s. So a fixed-wing type is actually quite easy to shoot down since its speed is lower, but a wing can be accelerated to good speeds, and eventually you could even install not just an internal combustion engine, but a turbine as well, without significantly changing the configuration of the aircraft itself. So they're already thinking ahead. And basically, if the SBU has taken this on, then believe me, they're doing a great job in this regard. First of all, when it comes to target designation and carrying out combat missions, they've made significant progress, as well as in the production of this kind of drone. And as for the fact that the Geran drones are now Russian-Chinese, and because they're Russian-Chinese, they can produce a lot of them. So what is a Geran? Right now, the Geran is a body cast in Russia. The body is Russian, but the Chinese have already set up a factory in Russia for the engine. The internal combustion engine is still produced in Russia, but the turbines are currently made by the Chinese. This is for the Geran 3. Most of the components and assemblies, especially the servos and some control systems, are Chinese. Over 50% of it is Chinese made. And the main board is also produced there. So that's what the Geran is. And now they've started producing a lot of them, about 150 to 200 per day. They use up to 100 against us, which means they store about 100 in their own warehouses. These warehouses were identified by security services and drones were sent there. As for the extent of the damage, I think confirmation will come in sometime. But we have to keep working. Even at distances of 300, 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers, these drones can reach their targets. The main thing is to scale up production and keep striking there constantly. Believe me, this issue can be solved. We can reduce the number of gerans in the warehouses and eventually get to the production sites themselves, because production needs to be stopped, and not just in Russia. Without destroying the production facilities in China, we won't reach a certain level. In the end, even if we destroy all production in Russia, they'll just move it to China and start bringing in Chinese drones.
Roman Grigorievich, here is some fresh information to confirm your words. Bloomberg writes, the Saratov oil refinery has stopped receiving oil after the latest drone attack. This could affect gasoline supplies. The situation is dire. It belongs to Rosneft. Roman Grigorievich, please comment on this.
This Saratov plant on the banks of the Volga used to receive 7 million tons of oil. So, the Volga divides the area essentially into Saratov and Yelnitsa. Saratov is on the west bank, Yelnitsa is on the east. And this plant was right on the bank of the Volga. Naturally, it was only a matter of time before we reached it. The main thing was to give the order to allow strikes, as they say. The question is, why was it forbidden before? That's another issue. That's Article 111 of the Criminal Code. And once the strikes began, naturally, the Saratov refinery was immediately hit. It's not going anywhere. It's been standing there for 90 years. That plant is 90 years old. If I remember correctly, the plant is called creaking. So it was only a matter of time before it got hit. It was hit. The combat mission was accomplished. I think it was the Unmanned Systems Forces, our SBS operators, who carried out the mission. By the way, they also have AN-196s. These are those fierce Antonov drones that struck the target, and it came to a complete stop. So you could say that now the Russians will have to figure out what to do with at least 7 million tons. And most likely, since they can no longer send additional oil to foreign markets, they'll start shutting down their production infrastructure, and there will be a shortage of gasoline. This plant mainly produced gasoline and diesel. And naturally, this gasoline and diesel won't reach either the domestic market or the foreign market because it's closed off, not even to the Russian army. And actually, it didn't really supply Moscow that much. In order to cut off, say, fuel supplies to Moscow and the Moscow region, you'd have to shut down 2 more plants. To shut down a plant, so who supplies there? Mainly it's the Kapotnya, the Kapotnya oil refinery. It supplies almost half of the gasoline and diesel for Moscow and the Moscow region. And if we do manage to finally destroy this Druzhba oil pipeline, shut it down along its entire route, then the Moser oil refinery, which used to send the other half of the fuel to Moscow, well, that was the Belovezhskaya Moser oil refinery. Muscovites, besides not being able to fly out, now won't even be able to leave by other means. So just imagine spending the velvet season sitting somewhere in Moscow's basements.
Roman Grigorievich, a very important topic is the enemy's offensive, the enemy's advance near Dobropolye, and the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Let's start with Dobropolye. A breakthrough of 15 to 18 kilometers. Kucherov Yar and Zolotoy Kolodets have been captured. At this point, is this a local tactical operation or the beginning of a major enemy offensive?
Well, the thing is, when carrying out the tasks of the first wave, these are shaping operations, so-called reconnaissance in force, an attempt to break through the front lines, after which the second wave moves in. The second wave, which is now starting to approach, we can already see it. Equipment, ammunition, fresh personnel, so to speak, they can enter the breakthrough if it happens, right? And then they could move into open operational space, whereas they say no one has set foot and go wherever they want, as far as they can, until they run out of fuel. But right now, there is no such breakthrough, even though everyone keeps talking about a breakthrough. No, there is no operational breakthrough. What we have is operational infiltration through our positions. But why did this operational infiltration happen? Because we don't have enough troop density along the line of contact, especially on the main section from Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka. Well, it's not enough. Everyone understands that perfectly well. Roughly speaking, there should be 3 strong points per kilometer, meaning a company should cover 1 kilometer. But sometimes in our case, a company covers several kilometers, and there's just 1 strong point for several kilometers. Naturally, the Russians can slip through between these forward strong points in sufficient numbers to then regroup somewhere in the rear and cause trouble at distances of 10 to 15 kilometers. So that's how they broke through. But in reality, they didn't actually break through. No one saw them. They slipped through, and then started causing chaos in the rear, as they say. And then Deep State drew a map showing a breakthrough as such. But there was no breakthrough. And at the moment, a decision has been made to send reserves there to plug the gaps in that direction. Well, how about us? How long have we been talking about this? We've been talking about this for 3 months. Syrskyi needs to make a decision. He should have decided not to run around the Sumy, Kursk, Kharkiv, and Belgorod regions, but to focus on the Eastern Front. Why? Because the main objective for the Russians is to capture the Donetsk region. Naturally, they will put pressure on Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, because without Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, they won't be able to get to Dobropilya. And without Dobropilya, they ultimately won't be able to advance from the west toward Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Druzhkivka. In other words, this operation is obvious. It's right there on the map. And our third line of defense was holding the Russians back quite well until Syrskyi started reducing the troop density. Why did he start reducing it? Let them figure that out themselves. Did politicians tell him to do it? Did he come up with it himself? Did he decide to make a run for it? Or did he just plain decide to give up Donbas? I don't know why, but based on this inaction, I'll say it again. If we hadn't been talking about this for 3 months, maybe it wouldn't be worth mentioning now, but for 3 months, in almost every broadcast, we've been saying, in order to hold the Eastern Front, we need to increase troop density by bringing in law enforcement personnel. Well, every single stream talked about this. So in the end, that's what happened. They deployed the law enforcement units, sent the National Guard there, the first corps of the National Guard. That's exactly what law enforcement units are. The National Guard is part of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs needs to be put into action. There are about 300,000 of them, and we need about 100,000 for the armed forces of Ukraine. And that's it. There won't be any more questions. There won't be these breakthroughs. Well, they're not really breakthroughs. I'll say it again. It's infiltration. Infiltration that our forward observation posts simply didn't notice. And then when they showed up in the rear, that's when they started dealing with these issues. It's about the same situation as when, if you remember, Laptia and Aladin once said that they didn't notice the Ukrainian troops who got into their rear last year in Kursk. This was exactly the same kind of tactical infiltration. So there were too few of Laptia and Aladin along the borderline. Our troops slipped through between them, and then it was easy to crush them from the rear. They were crushed, and the breakthrough happened. So to prevent such a breakthrough, it's better not to allow it at all. That is, immediately increase the troop density along the Donetsk front. The Russians will not launch any large-scale offensives anywhere else except the Donetsk and part of the Zaporizhia front. Why? Because they need to expand the land corridor. Why is Putin now demanding that we withdraw ourselves from the Donetsk direction?
Roman Grigorievich, you just spoke very concisely, but I would like you to specifically articulate separately for our audience, because this is very important for them, about the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. So, what is the danger for the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector?
If we allow the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, that is, if they push us out from this direction, after that they gain what is called operational space, practically all the way to Pavlograd, which is already in the Dnipropetrovsk region. And in reality, the operational space there extends all the way to the Dnipro. That's why, for example, the Poles up to the Dnipro, meaning up to the Dnipro River, because they could advance not only toward Pavlograd or Dnipro, but also toward Kremenchuk or Poltava. In other words, from the left bank, they could go anywhere. It's practically all flatland there. That is the third ridge, the so-called last Donetsk ridge. That's the third line of defense, which our forces are currently holding in the area of Pokrovsk, from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka. If you let them through, then only the Dnipro will stop them further on. I mean, the Dnipro River. Do you know why the Poles are now building a defense system, and where? On the Vistula. Not along the border with, say, Belarus or even the Kaliningrad region, because it's flat terrain there as well. The first real obstacle is the Vistula. That's why they're building a certain defensive system on the western bank of the Vistula. And they're absolutely right to do so, by the way. That's exactly the right move. So we must not allow the Russians to break through the third line of defense. Otherwise, we'll end up chasing them on the right bank of the Dnipro while they're already moving around the left bank near Kherson. In other words, this is a very dangerous situation at the moment. And why have we been talking about it for 3 months? It's not just idle talk. Stop running around Sumy and Kursk. Russians aren't going to advance on Sumy and Kiev from the Kursk direction. Don't believe those crazy deputies who've worn their hands to the bone digging Kiev's defense system. There's no need to dig in around Kiev. They won't reach Kiev, so pull those deputies back. Let the Verkhovna Rada focus on passing some laws instead. Otherwise, in their foolishness, they'll end up digging all the way to the center of the earth. They're the ones who started digging around Kiev. And now even some of our military comrades, well, not exactly military, you know what I mean. So there's no need to run around anywhere. All of this is just noise grenades, so-called diversionary maneuvers. By the way, it's the same story in Kharkiv and in Kherson. But the real pressure from the Russians will be focused on breaking through the third line of defense, on capturing the Donetsk positions, the Donetsk front lines. And that's where they'll be concentrating their efforts. This is what Syrskyi needs to be told. I don't know, again, what does it even mean to explain it to him? Do you think he doesn't understand? He's as much of a military man as I am. He understands this perfectly well. Any lieutenant would get it just by looking at the elevation map. You just look at the elevation map, see the deployment of forces and assets on both sides, and you immediately understand where one side will go and what the other side needs to do. And if Syrski understands this and still doesn't act, then he's not doing it for his own reasons or because of political orders he's getting from the office. So let them figure it out themselves, but we won't let you surrender Donbass comrades from the Green Party.
Dear audience, please like this video. Leave a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine and the armed forces of Ukraine. Roman Svitan and I are working for you, for audiences all over the world, so that they know the truth about Russian aggression and Russia's war against Ukraine. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Svitan, thank you. And as always, see you this Friday.
Goodbye.